Welcome. Glad you're here. My name is Drew. I am a college pastor in not Texas. I'm in Mississippi. Clinton, if you don't know your Mississippi geography, Clinton's like just west of Jackson. I've been the college minister for just finished my 9th year. I was on staff part-time as associate college minister 3 years before that, but I landed at Morrison Heights in 2005 when I was a student at Mississippi College. Someone asked me to play bass in the band, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I'm not really going to church. I haven't found my church home yet, so yeah. And just never left, y'all.
Nice.
Still there 18 years later. But I love my church, good leadership. It's home. We do ministry right now on 4 campuses in the Jackson metro area. So Mississippi College, we're about half a mile from the campus. Small, private, Southern Baptist. They have about 5,000 students enrolled, undergraduate, grad students. 15 minutes one direction in the thriving metropolis of Raymond, Mississippi. We have Hines Community College. Mississippi likes to put dorms at their community college, so we do dorm ministry at Hines. 15 minutes the other direction, there's Jackson State University, HBCU in Jackson. And then last year we launched ministry at Millsaps, which is a very small private liberal arts college. So we're constantly thinking, how can we be reaching more campuses with the gospel? And I just tell you that because context is important with some of the things I'll share. Sometimes it's helpful to hear, okay, Drew's doing it this way, but my context looks different. If you're at a big state school, we're not really doing that kind of ministry. But my hope is that I'm going to give you some principles that are going to help no matter your context, right? So if you're in here, and there could be all different range of where you're at with the leadership team. When I stepped into the college ministry, the role I took 9 years ago, our leadership team needed a reboot. We had some leaders who were stepping out a little disenchanted with our ministry. A guy before me who's my mentor, a super faithful guy, but we just had a lot of transition in our ministry as we'd begun engaging students at the community college. We had all these new students coming in, and some of our leaders were like, I don't really know, this doesn't feel like my ministry anymore. And I had to sit down and basically reboot all of our leadership team. And then I've done it a little bit different every year since. So I want to share some of the things I've learned over the years, because if you're in here and you're just starting, you're like, I don't have any kind of student leadership team. You're probably thinking like, man, it would be so great if I just had some people who could help me do stuff. Like, if I could just not have to do everything by myself. And that's totally legit, because none of us want to be the only one doing all the work. You don't want to be the 1% doing 95% of the work. So what should your leadership team look like? At the beginning, this is my core conviction. An effective leadership team begins with the commitment to discipleship. Effective leadership team begins with the commitment to discipleship. And we're going to think about this in all kind of ways, but I've got 3 principles to starting your leadership team, and I'll give you all 3 at the top. Number 1, look to Jesus. Number 2, understand leadership development. And then number 3, we're going to think through practical steps. All right, so look to Jesus, understand leadership development, and then we'll talk about some practical steps. Taking practical steps. So look to Jesus. Jesus had a leadership team, right? His goal, though, was multiplication, not just accomplishing tasks. Now, his leaders did accomplish tasks for him. They helped him do the work, but they did that for a greater purpose. Jesus knew that a day was coming where he would leave, but they would stay. And he prepared them to lead the movement that the coming Holy Spirit would inaugurate when he left. So he had this over-the-horizon kingdom view, beyond the here and now. Sure, yes, the 12 did help him with the task, right? They distributed the bread and the fish. It's kind of like a welcome team, right? They were his welcome team as the 5,000 gathered. But he did that because of his over-the-horizon kingdom view. In this environment, even that welcome team, hey, I want you to take these baskets. That was a moment he knew he could teach them God is a provider. He always had this over-the-horizon kingdom view. So even if your college ministry is just starting out and you have like 2 people, I want you to have the same over-the-horizon kind of view that Jesus had. That through discipleship and leadership development, you can not just get help with those daily tasks of ministry, but you can begin a process of kingdom multiplication that's based on discipleship. So here's what Jesus did. He did 2 things. He invited men, and these men, his leadership team, into his life, and he challenged them to follow his life and teaching. Invited them into his life, challenged them to follow his teaching. So discipleship is accelerated when people have access to a life that they want to imitate. And so Jesus spent most of his time with his leadership team as they walked with him, as they learned from him. They weren't just hearing his teachings, they were seeing him as he lived them out. And so he began it with an invitation to discipleship. Hey, I want you to walk with me. And he gave them full access to his life as he equipped them to do Holy Spirit-led ministry. Because, again, his goal was multiplication. His goal was multiplication. So here's what I'm telling you. All this to sum it up. Your leadership team, I believe, needs to be first about discipleship. Second about being a leadership team. First about discipleship. Second about being a leadership team. Early in ministry, I really struggled to stop seeing my leadership team as a group of people who got jobs done for me and start seeing them as the first group of people that I need to invest my life into. And when I made that switch, it changed things for me and for my ministry. Like, this is my first pool of people that gets my best time because I want to see things multiply. How do you do that? How do you make disciples who can make disciples? How do you build leaders who can build leaders? So I want to show you a simple tool we use in our ministry. It helps us understand the process of discipleship and leadership development. Some of you may have seen it. It's called the Leadership Square. It's created by a group called 3DM. You can find it in the book. This has been a huge book for our ministry, Building a Discipling Culture by Mike Breen. So on your page, wherever you're taking notes, just draw a square. So this is where we're going to push into, okay, we've looked at Jesus, but how do we understand, how can we break down what Jesus did? How do we understand leadership development? If you want to begin your Bible at Mark 10. I forgot to get my Bible out of my bag, so I'm going to look it up on my phone here. Don't judge me. Mark 10. Verse 35. Mark 10:35, we're going to read through 45. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" I just love that James and John, they come up and like, "Jesus, all right, we're going to ask you something. Will you just go ahead and say yes?" And Jesus has none of that, right? Like these are like those 2 freshmen that come like, hey, Drew, we want you to tell us we can do something. What is it? I know you, and I know the answer is already going to be no. So they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "Yeah, we're able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the other 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. What I love about this passage, like you think about James and John and the other 10 and who they will be in the book of Acts, and you see this story here and you're like, those guys became those guys. Right, here they are at the beginning, and one is it's always encouraging to me that like, okay, Jesus had those disciples too. Right, like I'm not broken as a minister when these people come into my ministry and I have to have these conversations like, bro, you don't get it. Because Jesus had to have those conversations with his disciples to prepare him for the Acts type of ministry we see. Right, and so as we look at this story, we see James and John, and they come to Jesus and they ask him something, and Jesus says, you don't understand what you're asking. Like, oh yeah, we do. We can do whatever you're going to go through, Jesus. But they don't understand that Jesus is going to die on the cross for the sins of the world. They don't get it. And in discipleship and leadership development, we start with a D1 disciple. A D1 disciple. And a D1 disciple is unconsciously incompetent. We say that they are high in confidence, but low in competence. They just don't know what they don't know at this point. These are the freshmen that come into your ministry, and they come in like, this church is awesome. And they want to do everything, but they don't know how to do anything, but they still think they're great at everything. Y'all feel that? Because, man, I've been there. Every single one of us has been in a stage of unconscious incompetence. And that's where James and John are in this passage, and the other 10. They think that following Jesus is going to be about sitting at the right hand of glory, and Jesus looks at him and he says, no. I came to serve. I came to die. That's going to be your call. So here's what we do with our D1 disciples. We are called to be L1 leaders. And the L1 leader is a director. A director. The director says, I do, you watch. Watch me and learn from me. That's your role right now. Now, we don't want people to stay at this stage for very long. In fact, throughout the gospel accounts, you see Jesus constantly pushing people as fast as he can, right? Like we've got these D1 disciples here, and they're fighting over who's going to get to sit next to Jesus in heaven. And that's when Jesus looks at them and be like, no, guys, you got it all backwards. He's pushing them, right? He's pushing them as fast as he can. In fact, I always think about how Jesus gathers his disciples together. Think about one of the first things he does is he looks at them and he says, I'm going to send you out. 2 by 2. Sends out the 72. You're not going to take anything with you. You're just going to go from town to town proclaiming the news of the kingdom. Right? Like he pushes them out of the nest as fast as he can because he wants them to learn something. So in our discipleship, we want to move people from D1 to D2 really as quickly as we can. D2 disciples have become consciously incompetent. They've realized, I don't know how to lead. I don't know how to make disciples. And as a result of realizing that, they will become low in confidence as they realize they are low in competence. And as a D2, as you're leading D2 disciples, we are going to be an L2 leader. And an L2 leader is a coach. And the coach says, I do, you help. And this is a difficult stage to lead our people through. But my guess is if you think about every single one of your leadership experiences, maybe every time you've stepped up a role, you have had a point where you feel this. Right, like our students talk about it all the time, this idea of the imposter syndrome. When you graduate college and you step into a new job and you look around, you feel like everyone knows what they're doing, but not you. And you feel like a fake, right? Like that's the D2 stage. This is a difficult stage. And so we want to push them here. But here's the thing. When someone is in D2 stage of discipleship, your goal is to not let them quit. Because if they can get through this, they're going to end up going all the way around the square and ultimately become a reproducing disciple maker. Your goal is to not let them quit. How do you keep them from quitting? You can do three things. Number one is you can encourage them. Trade markers here. Encourage them. Just find something they do good. Like, man, you just really kill it when you hand out the programs on Wednesday nights at midweek. Dude, you're just here and you look good, right? Whatever it takes, find ways to encourage them. Another thing you can do is give them hope. Tell them of a time. Bro, I've been exactly where you were. Someone asked me to lead this part of the college ministry, and I got in. I thought I was going to kill it, and I realized, man, I thought we were going to lead this team, and we were going to go take this campus for Christ. And we went in there, and we had this party, and no one showed up. Been there. Give them hope. And then finally, give them your time. Make yourselves available to that leader. Just sit down, let them talk, help them process. Encourage them, give them hope, and give them time. Because here's the thing, y'all. If you let them quit, here's what they're going to do. They're going to step. Instead of moving around the square, they're going to exit. Probably step off your leadership team. They'll attend your church for a little bit, and then they'll stop attending your church. A few months later, they'll start to feel bad they're not in church. They'll go to another church, and they'll just repeat this process over and over again. And their leadership capacity is going to get maxed at just handing out brochures or holding open doors. And we want more for our students than that, right? So don't let them quit. What they need to learn, keep moving around the square and get to D3, discipleship. Now, before I tell you a little bit about D3 discipleship, I need to warn you that there is a danger. We call it the D2 pit in our ministry. There's a danger that students can round this corner and they fall straight into here. And they'll want to try to set up camp down here. Because down in the pit, there can be tar. It kind of keeps you stuck. They're like, man, I don't know. I'm never going to be like Drew. He's leading a ministry. And I invite people to disciple, and no one ever wants to show up, and they're having what we call a pit-y party. That usually gets more laughs. I don't know. I thought it was pretty good. So they're going to want to get in the pit. And I'll warn you, too, you as the ministry leader, when your disciples go in the pit, you're going to feel tempted to get down there with them. Right? I've been discipling him for 3 months. I really thought he was going to be in a better spot, and he's not. Maybe I'm a bad college minister. So don't do it. Don't get down in the pit with them. You need to be up here, giving them tough love, trying to lovingly coax them out of the pit. Right? You're gonna show them that there's a ladder. Hey, here's some things you need to do. Right? I know your discipleship group, your D group, your huddle, whatever you call it. I know they're not responding to your text. Keep trying. That's all God's calling you to do. Let's celebrate every success. Right? A little bit of all right, just put your hand on that rung. All right, good job. Next one, move up. And you need to do that for them so that later in life, when they're out of your ministry and they go through this process again, they're going to know how to get out of the pit for themselves without you there. So you need to teach them how to get out of the pit. So they need to, every student leader needs to walk through this phase. Because here's the key learning. To go from D2 and become a D3 disciple, students need to learn how to say, God is in control. God is in control. Y'all, so much about what we learn in this phase is that I am not in control. The work that God wants to do is not dependent upon my skills, it's not dependent upon my gifts. I offer them freely, but ultimately God's in control of what happens after I do what he's called me to do. And we have to learn this, because once we learn this, we become a D3 disciple. I apologize, I did not leave myself enough space. If you're like type A and you want everything to be neat and tidy, that's not who I am. I apologize. So D3 disciples are becoming consciously competent. They have growing confidence and growing competence. Growing confidence and competence. So this is where they're starting to put some things together. They still have to think about everything they do. I always liken it to when you're learning how to play a sport. When you're learning how to swing a baseball bat, when you're first doing that, you're thinking about every single thing you're doing. Maybe you're starting to have some success. You're starting to hit the ball and get on base, but you're still having to really think about it. So information process is happening. And as a D3 disciple, we want to be an L3 leader. And L3 leaders are consultants. Consultants say, you do, I will help. You see how we're working through this process of releasing more and more to our student leaders. So you're going to do it, but I'm going to be there to assist you. I'm going to be there to walk you through the process, help you think through the successes and the failures. Now, it's important that we are available to our leaders when they fail, because if they're entering that process, they got some growing confidence and competence, but then they experience failure in their leadership. If you're not there to help them evaluate and process and learn and grow, then there's the possibility that they could like scoot back on the square and come back down into this pit. So you need to be there for them to help them walk through the process. And it's okay to like let them begin to run with some ideas here, because that's a part of the growing process. Sometimes you may need to let your D3 disciples do something that you're looking at and you're like, man, ain't no way that's going to work. They just need to do it, and they need to learn and grow. Why am I getting a public safety alert? Anybody else getting that? That's weird. All right, so D3, L3, the final stage of discipleship is a D4 disciple. D4 disciple. They are now unconsciously competent. They are high in confidence and competence. This is the stage where they're doing things, they're making disciples, they're sharing the gospel naturally without having to really think about it. It just flows out of who they are because of how you've led and equipped them over time. And D4 disciples, we need to be an L4 leader. That's a cheerleader. And this is a fun phase. The cheerleader says, you do, I celebrate. You do, I celebrate. Probably 5 years ago now in our ministry, it's when I transitioned my leadership team again, and we focused in on discipleship. And I remember that first group of guys I discipled that first year. And at the end of that year, I had a freshman the following fall come to me. He said, hey, Drew, I really like someone to disciple me, and I was wondering if you would disciple me. And I looked at him like, bro, you want a good thing, right? I actually don't have space on my calendar right now for me to disciple you, but I got a guy. His name's Dylan. Dylan is the man. I've been investing in him for the last year. And like, you two are going to connect, and you're going to get so much out of Dylan discipling you, right? And so I'm handing him off. And now I'm sitting down with Dylan each week, and as he's seeing success in the lives of the people he's discipling, I celebrate that in him. In a lot of ways, this is a sending phase when you're releasing people. So like the kind of like moving out of your house that they've been in, and they're starting their own family. And that's a fun phase. And at this phase, we really just get to like, hey, once a month, like let's just gather around the table, have dinner at our house, and celebrate what God's doing through your ministry. All right, so understanding leadership development. Before I move on to practical steps, what questions do you have for me on this? Yeah.
How many people do you think you can do this with at one time?
I think that depends on the person. So I like to disciple.
Like what's healthy in your mind? Like have you found it yet?
So we use this at all levels of our ministry, and we contextualize it for the different levels, right? So like when I'm discipling guys, I like to disciple around 6 guys. That feels right for me.
Do you walk them through all 6 of them at the same time?
No, they're all at different stages. Yeah, and when I'm discipling them, they're all at different stages. Sometimes I will show this to the guys I'm discipling and say, hey, where are you? Usually they get it right if they're already kind of leading. But sometimes they'll be like, man, I think I'm D3 about to hit D4. And I'm like, bro, the fact you said that shows you are clearly D1. You are clearly D1. So we use it, but also we're thinking about this. We use missional community model in our ministry. So I have student leaders leading those. And we're saying like, hey, think about the people coming to your missional community. What are you doing to move them around the square to get them to a place where they're ready to lead a missional community? Right, so we're thinking about this really like in everything we do. When we start something new, we're going to walk through this square personally. So we're using it at all different levels. But I tend to think about like how many can I disciple? We use like the huddle model of discipleship. So I'm meeting with 6 guys weekly. That's my preferred. Sometimes more, sometimes less though. Good question. What other questions y'all got for me? To help this be more clear.
I'm sure the answer is also it depends, but what timeline do you see most people going around in, and
Yeah.
Has there ever been a time where you're like, I've been doing this for 3 years, it's time to somewhere else?
Yeah, they're just kind of stuck in the pit forever. We have that. Generally, so the clearest illustration here of this playing out is in our student huddle discipleship, Grow Group Huddle. I've found that a kid who grew up in church needs a year of someone discipling them before they're ready to go lead other people through this. A year minimum. It's very rare that a student can do it in less than a year. But I always remember, like, it took Jesus 3 years to get his people ready. Now, I almost typically, like, if I could assign it, if I get someone week 1 of the year, this is freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, like honestly, junior and senior year, and I'm trying to release them. Like typically I'm finding that someone that like I could just really trust and hand the reins off to, that happens somewhere in the middle of senior year too. So again, I think that goes back to your question. Like there's this for preparing people to be our Grow Group Huddle leaders. But then also there's like the big picture of someone who's ready to lead in a significant way beyond just discipling 3 or 4 people. That happens over the course of college. Have I made things more clear or less clear by answering those questions?
So you said that's people who grew up in church. Is it faster for those who don't?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
There's no baggage type.
That's right.
Okay, if you're doing something new, first time with it, and say you were to have seen this, you implement this, or whatever the case may be, it's you. I don't want to put this without making people sound not Christian enough.
I'll just say it. I love those kind of statements.
You go out like, hey, you seem to have it together, come be an L4 leader with me, or do you wait the time out and walk that circle or walk that square before you even like have a leader? Like, do you wait until you can walk 6 guys or girls to a D4 before you start the leader process?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're asking. It's like, would I ever invite someone in that I've kind of watched? It's so for us, I want people to generally walk through our discipleship process before they start leading. I can think of one time I let a student start discipling others before they were ready, before they had been discipled, and she was never able to get it off the ground. So no, I generally will make people be discipled, be led by someone else. And like I never talk about this from the stage in our ministry. This is discipleship language for us. And this helps us understand as leaders how we need to interact with the people who are following us and how we need to best lead them. I can think of maybe one time I had a student who I could have said like, hey, here's what I'm doing. You got everything you need to just go. I have students who are really close, so I would begin discipling them or have someone begin discipling them, and I would tell that student like, hey, I think you're really ready. Once you just experience it for a month or two, I think you'll be ready to launch your own. Yeah.
Do you say the first D1 you're discipling somebody, and then you're encouraging them, okay, eventually you're going to go disciple somebody.
Yep.
And maybe you start out, you're discipling somebody else and they're kind of tagging along, helping. When they go and disciple, are they doing the same structure, like this, pretty much the same thing you're doing to disciple, or
Yep.
are you giving them kind of free reign to do what, they feel they need to do?
A little bit of both. We have some, with our discipleship, we have some guardrails. Hey, here's some things you're going to do every week with your students that you're discipling no matter what. But then there's also freedom because every group is different. So the answer is a little bit of both. I tell you what, let's do this. Maybe you're still looking at me like, man, I still don't really know what this has to do with the leadership team. So let me move into some practical steps. If you're wanting to launch a leadership team, what do you need to do? And I'll try to tie this all back in together. Number one, step one, I've got 8 steps, but they're short, don't worry. Step one, establish the vision. What are you calling your students to? What is it your ministry is going to be about? You don't need a clear 5-year roadmap, but you do need to know the things that are important to you, the things you want to see accomplished if your leaders say yes to leading in your ministry. And one word of advice, make your vision bigger than a worship gathering. So, step one, establish the vision. Step two, you need to decide who to invite. And this is personal for you. If your ministry is 3 believers who have a decent relationship with the Lord, and they're showing up okay, that's probably your leadership team. That's good, right? Generally, though, you're looking for people, this is what we say, we're looking for people who are faithful, available, and teachable. Faithful, available, teachable. I've found that I can go a lot further with students who are those 3 things than I can with the rock star leader on campus who's way overcommitted. I'd rather have someone who's not a big deal on campus, but they're willing to show up and they're willing to let me speak into their life. Right, so decide who to invite. Step 3, communicate the vision. So to your prospective leaders, you need to communicate what you've decided is important to you in your ministry. I'd recommend sitting down one-on-one with each possible leader and talking through it with them. Just talk ministry, talk vision, and then let them speak into the process. When I rebooted, I launched my first leadership team. I met with each person I wanted to invite and I asked them, hey, why are you at Morrison Heights? What is it about Morrison Heights that got you here? What's somewhere you've seen God at work? What are you celebrating? And then I asked them, what's one thing you wish we did differently? Now, I knew 90% what their answers were going to be. But they got to speak into our ministry vision and process. So as you're communicating the vision, spend time listening because it's going to give you a better sense of what they're experiencing. Then communicate the vision and get feedback. Step 4, make the ask. Make the ask. Invite them, hey, I want you to join my team. But give clear expectations. Let them know exactly how much time you think it's going to take for them to do it. How much time you expect for them to give. Tell them anything you're going to require them to be at. Then just say, hey, I know this is a big commitment. Take a couple days, pray about it, get back to me. But also, as you make the ask, tell them how you want to invest in them. Hey, if you will invest this, here's what I'm going to do to invest in you. Or here's what our staff is going to do to invest in you. So if you're going to disciple these students as they lead and disciple others, now's the time to tell them, like, hey, I don't just want you to be on my leadership team. For the next 2 semesters, I actually want to invest in you weekly and disciple you and help you become a disciple maker. And at the end of that, I want you to go out and disciple others, right? So step 4, make the ask. Step 5, formalize the process. And by that I mean like formalize however you want to do it, what your leadership team's gonna look like. So much flexibility here. You can do a leadership covenant if you want. That's never been my thing, but I know guys who do it, and they love it. But you have to think through questions like, how are you going to recognize your leaders? Will you recognize your leaders? Like in a public way. To what degree are they official? I've done it all sorts of ways. Right now, we don't really do anything in our ministry to like publicly say, hey, here's Morrison Heights leadership team. For right now, I like that. But in the past, I've done it differently. So formalize the process in whatever way makes sense to you. Step 6, meet. Meet with your leaders. Have a regular meeting. How often? That's up to you. I like to meet every week with my leaders. And here's what I would recommend. Keep your meeting time short and your discipleship time long. We meet for an hour and a half, and I spend 20 minutes just whatever we need. Maybe it's an equipping training time. Maybe we got some just announcement type stuff we need to do. Maybe there needs to be some vision casting. And then at about the 20-25 minute mark, we break into discipleship huddles where I have people who are either me, some staff, or maybe some recent graduates who are discipling our students. And that's how we spend the last hour, 10 minutes every week. Step 7, celebrate success and coach your leaders through failure. Celebrate success, coach them through failure. Because here's the thing, they're going to fail. 100% of your leaders are going to fail at some point. And I tell my leaders that all the time, like, hey, y'all are not going to, you're going to struggle at some point. And it's going to be hard. And I want you to. Like, I want you to do that now while you're in my ministry so that when you leave, wherever God's calling you, wherever we're sending you, you're going to be ready. When I was preparing for this, I texted a few friends, said, hey, what have you learned about leaders? One of them texted me back and he's like, one thing I've been realizing lately is most of the leaders who come to my church have never failed. Like most of our college students have never really experienced failure. Man, what an awesome opportunity for us to prepare them for adulthood. So look at them like, hey bro, you're an adult and now you're going to fail a lot. Let's walk with them through it. To get around the square, they're going to need your coaching. Final step, evaluate and improve. Evaluate and improve your leadership team. I've done leadership a little bit different every single year I've been in college ministry. So continue to evaluate and improve. And don't forget to invite your leaders into that evaluation process. Continue to listen to them. So here's been my goal. Again, we started by looking to Jesus, see what he did, what he desired to accomplish so that he could see a multiplying kingdom effort. We thought about how we see Jesus taking his disciples from they don't know anything to they're ready to go die for the gospel. Right, and then what I hope you can do is take this square and say, okay, when I think about how to practically do my leadership team, what am I going to do to take my leaders from this to this? Ultimately, if you're not discipling them, you're not going to get them there. So to bring it all back full circle, I think leadership team has to first be about a commitment to discipleship before it's anything else. All right, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to spend the rest of our time taking questions. So what questions do y'all have for me? Yeah.
I know you said it in the beginning. I just wanted to hear, clarify whether you knew something different or what you wrote. leadership team, the disciple team, maybe your L4 leader, your D4,
Mhm.
whatever the case may be. Do you separate that from? Do you have a midweek gathering?
Yes.
Your we call it our gathering team.
Uh-huh.
Do you separate that? Like to where the people,
Two different groups?
Yeah.
So here's
you have
what...
like a serve team.
Right. Here's what I would say we're doing right now. So generally, when I think about like this over a 4-year process with our students, freshmen, sophomores are hanging out around here. Those are the key people right now we're wanting to say like, hey, we want you to be a part of helping with our midweek. Right? Really easy entry. Lets them get some experience. We can see who's going to be faithful, available, teachable to begin to elevate them as leaders. And so we've tried to intentionally, like our D3, D4 leaders, not rely on them as much for accomplishing tasks like that. They're always willing, like they'll help. But I'd rather them focus their time on investing and into this group, more so than also doing this group's jobs. So that's how we've approached it. And that's making sense for us right now. Hey, how can we get as many of these unconsciously incompetent people helping us on Wednesdays as we can? Yes.
So the college ministry is a 4-year cycle. So I'm not even a full year into my ministry, and our college ministry is about 100 plus, and it's very top heavy. So we just graduated like 25 solid seniors.
Yep.
We have 55, 60 quality juniors. And I'd say that's our strongest group. How do I institute this where that they're helping me invest in the younger class?
Good question.
But when I have
Yeah.
time to deal with them.
Yeah. Well, one, I'm jealous of your ministry.
I
I love those juniors and seniors. That sounds fun. Here's maybe what I would ask. Do you have something that they can reproduce in the lives of others? Right? And that was a big thing for our ministry that I really struggled with. Like, what am I asking them to reproduce? And is what I'm asking them to reproduce something only I can do? Right? Like, when our students look at our ministry, do they see the way I make disciples is I preach a sermon at a midweek worship service? Because that doesn't reproduce. So what we said is, okay, we're going to make disciples through meeting in groups of 3 to 5 believers. There's one believer, student, discipling other students. And I modeled what that looks like by discipling the leaders. And then the leaders go out during the week and they're learning from me, reproducing and making more disciples. So, but if you don't have whatever that thing is that they're reproducing, it's going to be hard. So they need something that they can see, that they can get, and that's simple, that they can then take and reproduce in the lives of others. Yeah.
This is kind of a loaded question, and it probably depends on the context and in your ministry, but I guess practically, how do you get students out of the pit?
How do you get them out of the pit when they're in the pit? It does go back to these 3 things. I am, to be honest, not the best with people in the pit. And you know, when you look at this, some of you, like you all are gifted probably more towards 1 or 2 of these L2 or L1, L2, L3, L4. Right? I think my sweet spot tends to be consultant, cheerleader. So what I do is when I have a student stuck into the pit, shepherding is pretty low in my gifting, but I have some folks on my team who are high shepherding. I usually go to them and be like, hey, one of my students, this is where they're at. What would you do? And they're like, oh, I'd invite them over to my house and I'd cook for them and we just hang out for a night. I'm like, cool, I could do that. But that's really what it comes down to is how are you going to encourage them? How are you going to give them hope? And especially, can you just get close to them? Now, again, like to the question I think you asked earlier, if you're like trying to disciple a 20-person leadership team all on your own, that's going to be hard to come by. So who's the person that can give your leaders time? Again, we're just thinking multiplication, right? There's 1. Y'all get the idea? Like on down. We want our students to have 1 person in front of them, a few people around them, and one person and a few people behind them. Yeah.
We were excited about this one, so that's why we have a lot of questions. Your ministry, I know this is not the same for everyone. If you're in a town with a major university, it might be the same. Do you have a BCM in your area?
We do. Multiple.
Okay. How hard and what do you do to combat the amount of time they are requiring you to spend on leadership team when you know that's the leader you need in your ministry?
Good question. So the question is, I'll rephrase it as my leadership team intersecting with leadership teams on campus, specifically campus ministries, right?
Because they require a lot of time.
Good question. I am never... So I will say I have great relationships with the BCM. In fact, the BCM leader, Mississippi still calls them BSUs. The leader at Mississippi College is one of my adult leaders. So we have a great relationship. She often says to her students, if you can only be involved in BSU or church, you should be involved in church, if that's all you have time for. And I'm grateful for that perspective because that's my perspective. Right? Like the local church is required for every believer, whether you're a college student or not. Like that's God's plan for the world. I also generally will tell students though, like if you have time for one, yes, local church, but you probably got time for more than one. I know my students, they have more time than they think they have. Here's what I will say. I look at what I think they need to be doing as believers. You need time to make disciples. You need time to live on mission. And if you don't have time, and you need to be involved in a local expression of the body of Christ, right? If you don't have time for those three things, you're too busy. You're just too busy. And so I ask them to do things that meets those responsibilities. Because like my core conviction is if I'm not doing that in the local church, then I'm falling short of what God's called me to do as a pastor. Okay? So here's what I ask them to do time-wise. One, I ask them to be consistent on Sundays and Wednesdays. I know sometimes life happens and you're not there. We're not like legalistic about it. Two, ask them to lead a grow group. That's our student-led discipleship. 3 to 5 believers. 3, I ask them to co-lead on a missional community team. So both of those two things are an hour, 15 minutes a week. And I tell them that. And then 3, I say, I expect you every Sunday night from 7:30 to 9 to be at my house because that's where we're going to disciple you. And I don't give skips for that because like that time is critical for me. And I also tell my students, hey, I know you're busy and I know you have a lot of commitments. If you can't do it, it's 100% okay with me. We will not think any less of you. I trust that you're making disciples. I trust you're living on mission. However, my commitment is that if you invest this time, one, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I am not personally doing, that I don't think is personally important for me to do as a believer. In fact, if I quit being college minister today and started doing a different job, I would continue to disciple through Grow Group. I would continue to lead a missional community, and I'd continue to have someone else pour into me. Wouldn't change, right? And so I'm asking y'all to do that because these are the things I want you to do when you graduate. And I don't, like, I try to keep the schedule free, so if they want to do BSU leadership team stuff, they can too. Like, I'm not scheduling over them, but I'm also not holding back what I want to invite them into because another campus ministry may also want to ask the same thing of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to expand, like, I love what you said there. You don't give skips for Sunday night.
I don't.
Would you cater that to meet the needs of the people? Like, we have a 3 or 4 person team that we can go out, and if you're on my leadership team, man, I cannot make Sunday nights at your house.
Yes.
Can you make Monday morning for coffee at 9 and Monday morning for...
So I don't flex it at all. When I invite them, like, the first thing you're getting invited to is Sunday night, 7:30 to 9. Like, you have to figure out a way to make it happen. So no, I don't. But then again, I'm working with right now close to 30 leaders. It's like I just have to say this is just the commitment. If you can't do it, like we have tons of leadership places. We have tons of places where we're moving people around the square in our ministry. But like I'm just going to go ahead and ask for that. And I ask for it early when I'm on my game, which I'm not always. So like we just finished asking all of our leaders to that time. And so they know what's coming in the fall. And so like and it's kind of part of growing up, like guys, you got to have a calendar. Like your study group texted you and they say the only time to get this project done is at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night. You already have a required meeting. Sorry, you can't do it that time. And again, it comes back to, for me, like if you're going to, these are the people who drive everything in our ministry. We're student-led, staff-supported. So like I want those people at the top to be the people most committed to our ministry. And if you're not super committed, it's okay. We got space for you to lead a missional community, and we need you. Use your gifts there. Like that's the primary place you're going to use your gifts anyway. So yeah, I would tell all of you, like, figure out what you want to ask them, and don't be afraid to ask them. Some are going to say no. That's okay. It's totally okay. Run with the people who are available. But we do the BSU leadership team, they meet at 9. And I tell my people, like, hey, I know some of y'all are going to do both, and that's cool. You can leave our meeting at 8:45. And you got time to get to Mandy's house. We don't schedule our retreat over BSU leadership. In fact, we do like a mission trip week that I require my leaders to be at, but I tell them, like, hey, if you're going to the BSU leadership retreat, that's cool. You can miss this part to be there. But I do have a retreat that they can't skip at the beginning. So that's how I've approached it. And there's constant tension. The biggest thing we've had to wrestle with is RAs. That's the biggest challenge. We have some really good RA leaders, but the amount of time they have to spend at the beginning of the semester makes it hard. We've worked it out for now. Here's another thing I've done. Mississippi College doesn't have fraternities and sororities. It has things called clubs and tribes. If you were in a real fraternity or sorority, you would think they were weird, and they are. But I had students who wanted to lead in their club and tribe, but they also want to do my leadership team. I told them, hey, 7:30 to 9, we meet. Well, if you were on this leadership position, like they had an 8 o'clock meeting. So I told them, you're going to have to pick. And they picked our leadership team. And they went and told MC's leadership. And they go, oh, okay, we'll just move our meeting. And I'm like, cool. My wife won't let me start at 9. I'm glad y'all can start that late. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask for time. Figure out what's important and ask for it, and run with the people who are willing to go. That's my advice. What other questions y'all got? Anything else?
So you said this illustration, you're using it all across your church, but you're not preaching it from
Yep.
the stage. Who sees this and at what point?
We use it regularly in our leadership huddles. So I've thrown out a lot of language. Here's how we're structured. So there's staff at the top and some folks who have come through our ministry who are kind of serving as like lay staff. They're discipling student leaders in huddles. And this is the highest challenge, highest commitment space for a student to enter into. Student leaders lead grow groups, which is kind of like a huddle, but it's a little bit lower commitment, a little bit lower challenge space. And they're also leading in our missional communities. So here, with the guys I'm discipling, I'm regularly asking them in huddle, hey, the people you're discipling, where are they at in the square? So I can remind them of this. And here's what this is a discipleship tool for us, right? So 1, we begin with biblical truth. 2, we use this to help us understand the biblical truth. And then finally, we move to applying it. So I'm asking them a question. All right, we've looked at this. The people who are following you, where are they? Put their name down. Now tell me, what's one thing you need to do this week to move someone along the square? A lot of times, like, man, they're really discouraged. I just need to hang out with them some. So student leaders will see it often. Sometimes we will show it to people who are in grow group and invite them out. Like when I'm doing that, I'm not necessarily showing them the leader stuff. I'm just showing them, hey, here's what it looks like to go from D1 to D4. And I'll show it to them if I'm discipling them over a year, about 3 months in, because that's when they're starting to feel discouraged. And I can let them know, like, hey, actually, this is like what you're feeling is normal. And we're going to get through this together so you can get here. So it happens in that small discipleship environment because we want to call people to respond in obedience somehow to God's word.
So it's not part of the make the ask, like, here's
Not
the
for me.
pitch.
No.
This is what you're signing up for.
No, I wouldn't necessarily use the language, but I have before. I mean, I've sat down and like, hey, I think you're ready to step up in leadership. Like, you've been serving super well. I think you're ready to like lead by discipling a couple people. Or I have a student who like, hey, you've been co-leading in this group. I think you're ready to launch out and start a new group. I don't know, I'm telling them they're going from D3 to D4, but that's how we're thinking about it.
So your student leaders are who you're discipling through this process.
That's right.
What's the difference between a grow group and a missional community?
So this is 3 to 5 believers.
Okay.
This is anywhere from 5 to 25 believers who are living together on mission. We do a rhythm, and with our mission, this is like our small group. We do a rhythm where there are 2 nights of what we call up in, where they're focused on their relationship up with God, in with other believers. Then on the 3rd week, we do what we call an out night, where they have a party and they're inviting people they wish knew Jesus better to hang out with them. And then the 4th week, I say you do whatever you want. I don't care. If y'all want to not meet, it's really okay. If you want to just go out to dinner together, that's cool. If you need to evaluate, plan, cool, whatever y'all need. I found my students respond really well to freedom, to make some choices. So does that help kind of show how we've broken all this down? What I love when it happens and my students are starting to see it is when they're discipling people in Grow Group who are also a part of their missional community, because now they're doing mission with the people they're discipling. Right? It's a really good growth environment when you're living in all these different ways together. Someone comes to an out night, the Grow Group leader can grab someone in Grow Group, hey, let's follow up, grab coffee, have a gospel appointment. I want you to watch me share the gospel. Next month, hey, I actually want you to share this part of, like, you share your story as a part of this. So move from I do, you watch to I do, you help. 3rd time, hey, you do the whole thing, and I'm just going to chip in a little bit.